Hey guys, I hope your break is going good so far. I just wanted to say before I start, there is a wood shredder in my neighborhood, so if you hear it, I am so sorry. I will try to talk loudly, okay? Alright, so let's look at this sheet of paper that I gave you guys. It's the graphing ratios. I believe I gave that to you guys on Wednesday or Friday. I think it was Wednesday, yes. So we're going to read the question together, and then we're going to figure out our missing values, okay? So it says the Polsby family is taking a bus to Madrid. The bus travels at a constant speed on the motorway. The table shows the distance that the bus travels in various amounts of time. Fill in the missing values, graph the values on the coordinate plane, and then determine how far the bus travels in 4.5 hours by looking at the graph. Okay, so let us look. I'm gonna look at this paper and then we're gonna do all of our work here. Okay, so I want to first find my missing values. To do that, I need to look at the ratio that I'm given. And I know that I'm given 2/120, correct? So I'm gonna do my work over here. Now I'm gonna show you guys that there's always a formula to figuring out your ratios, and it's pretty much the ratio you're given and then the piece of information that you're trying to find. So I know that I can travel 120 miles in 2 hours. So I'm gonna write 2 hours on top. So this will represent my hours, and my mileage will be on the bottom, which is 120. So I believe we did this one together, but I'm gonna do it again just so you guys are pretty confident on how I got this. So the first ratio I kind of want to fill in is I'm going to pick 240, and you'll see why I picked 240. So 240 is my mileage, so that means I need to put it on the bottom of my next ratio. Remember, we can write ratios in how many different ways? If you said 3, you are so correct. Now, give me 1 second. Let me find my calculator. Now, you tell me, how did I get from 120 to 240? What did I multiply or divide by? If you said I multiplied by 2, you are correct. So whatever I do on the bottom, I need to do for my numerator, right? So I multiplied my denominator by 2, so I'm going to multiply my cursed wood chipper numerator by 2 as well. So 2 times 2 is what? That is 4. Okay, so that means that I'm going to take this 4 and put it in my chart up here. So in 4 hours, the Polsby family will travel 240 miles, okay? Good so far? Awesome, let's keep moving. So that was my first ratio setup. I'm going to move on to the next one, okay? So I have my same ratio I would like to use. Let me scoot this down a bit. So I have 2, and then I also want to use, I would like to solve for, let's do 150, okay? So right here, I'm going to use this value, and I'm going to plug it in just like I did at the top, okay? So 2/120, that's the ratio I was given, right? So that's my hours, and this is my mileage. And that's going to equal, remember 150 is my mileage, so I'm going to put that on the same as the denominator, just like 120. Now, you guys are probably like, Miss Zielinski, I don't know how to get from 120 to 150. Well, guess what? That's why we have these nifty calculators. So I want you are allowed to use your calculator for this unit. I want you to divide 150 by 120. So you should get, sorry, I left my calculator at school. You should get 1.25. So if I multiply, and I will show you why I did that, if I multiply 120 by 1.25, let's just confirm our theory. One second. 120 times 1.25. We should get 150, and that is correct. So whatever I multiply on the bottom, I multiply on the top. Very good. So 2 times 1.25. If you guys don't know that, you can use your calculators. And that should give you 2.5. So that's what I'm going to put on the numerator. So I'm going to take that 2.5, go up to my graph, and plug in 2.5 hours. Okay, so now I'm going to keep going. So that was my first, those were my first two ratios. The ratios for 2.5 hours and then 150 miles, and then 4 hours for 240 miles. Now, I'm going to go over and I'm going to set up the next ratio. So whenever you guys do these, I want you to be neat, okay? So I can use the same ratio. So 2 over 120 is equal to my blank ratio. Now, we have said that 2 represents my hours and 120 represents my miles. So I'm going to solve for my next ratio. But this time, that 3 goes in my numerator because 3 represents what? It represents my time, same as 2. You are not going to put the 3 on the bottom because you're telling me that's 3 miles, not 3 hours. Remember, we said order matters. So we're going to figure out how did we multiply 2, or what did we multiply 2 by to get 3. So use your calculators. If you don't know how to do this in your head, do 3 divided by, 3 divided by 2 gives me 1.5. So if I multiply 2 by 1.5, I should get 3, okay? So remember, whatever we do on the top or bottom, we got to do on the other side. So I need to multiply my denominator by the same thing. So 120 times 1.5 gives me what? If you said 180, you are correct. So put 180 on, as your denominator. And now where am I gonna put 180 on my chart? Underneath 3. Very good. So that means in 3 hours, they will be able to drive 180 miles, okay? So I want you to try 5 and 3.5 on your own, and then I'm going to go over it. So if you guys want to pause the video, you can. I'm going to keep going. So pause and solve for 5 and 3.5, okay? Alright, so hopefully you solved for 5 and 3.5, the hours. I'm going to go ahead and solve for them down here. So I'm going to set up the ratio I have. I was given 2 over 120. I'm going to use it because it's just easy. Could you use any of the other ratios to figure out the next 2 missing ratios? Yeah, you could. You don't always have to stick with 2 over 120. They're all equivalent. So they increase or decrease by an equivalent amount. That's what equivalent ratios mean. So 2 over 120 is equivalent to 4 over 240, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and put 5 because I want to solve for that one. 5 is the amount of hours it takes the Polesby to drive however many miles. So that's what I want to figure out. So I'm going to see how much I need to multiply 2 by to get 5. If you don't know how many times 2 can go into 5, do 5 divided by 2, which gives you 2.5. So 2 times 2.5, and again, I'm going to reiterate, you guys can use your calculators. This is easy mental math, but if you want to go quickly, that is okay, because this is an assignment, a unit that I am permitting you to use a calculator on. So whatever you multiply on the top by, you need to do on the bottom. So then you're going to do 120 times 2.5, and you should get what? If you said 300 miles, you are correct. So I'm going to take that 300 and go to the chart up here. Plug in 300. Now I'm going to solve for my last ratio. Now we're going to do this like a Dora the Explorer. You are going to tell me what I should plug in. So if you're telling me to plug in 2 over 120, you are correct. 2 over 120. Alright, so 3.5. I'm going to put 3.5 right here. Am I correct? Where should I put it? Okay, I'll put it on the top. So 3.5, you are correct. It is the amount of hours it takes them. It is not the amount of miles, so I cannot put that as my denominator. Remember, order matters. So I want to figure out, how did I get from 2 to 3.5? So I'm going to do 3.5 divided by 2 gives me 1.75. So if I multiply 2, oops, sorry, we're getting a little close, by 1.75 on the top to get 3.5, we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. So 120 times 1.75 gives me 210. So in 3.5 hours, they traveled 210 miles. So I'm going to take that 210 and go ahead and put that up here. Now, do you guys see how that makes sense? Because 3.5 is less than 5 hours and the mileage is less as well. That way I want you to know you don't have to always go in order, guys. Do you see how you can go out of order? It's the fact that they're equivalent ratios. That's what lets you know that you're doing it correctly. So we are going to graph these points real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and graph the first one. Now, do you remember what I told you about the graph? If you said that if the line is linear, when you graph it, that you get a linear function, you are correct. So whenever I graph these points, if I get a function that is linear, it's a straight line, then that means I've done my ratios correctly. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. 2 is my x. So if you want to do a quick x and y table, off to the side you can. I'm going to just do a couple just to start you off. But I know that my first row is going to be my x. So if you want to either do an x and y table on the side and do that, that's fine. Or you can just go ahead and say that time is your x value and distance is your y. That is more than fine as well. Remember, we can do x and y tables vertically or horizontally. So my first one is 120. So that means I'm going to go into, that's 2 hours, and I want to go up to 120 miles. That is right here. So x, remember we go in first for x. This is my x axis and this is my y. And then we go in first on the x and then go up to the y, okay? So my next point is 2.5, 150. So I want to go in at 2.5, that's between 2 and 3, and I want to go up to 150. That is between 120 and 180. Okay? Okay? Next I want to go to 3 hours and 180 miles. So I'm going to go on the x to 3 miles, and I'm going to go up on the y to 180 miles. Good, so we've graphed that, we've plotted all these points. Next, we got a couple more. So I want to go into 4 hours and then 240 miles. So I'm going to go into 4 hours and up to, oops, lost my place. 4 hours up to 240 miles. Good? Okay, now last couple ones is 5 and then 300. So I want to go to 5 hours and all the way up to 300 miles. Good so far? Awesome. Now, 3.5 should have said 4.5, because remember what we're solving for. It's curious to know how much they traveled in 4.5 hours. But that is okay if you, I mean, if you guys got it so far, then that's fine. It was a typo. If you do 3.5, I'll take that. So 3.5, I'm going to go all the way up to 210. And that is between 180 and 240. Now, remember I told you when you are finished graphing, you always need to connect your dots. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the dots. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm not good at connecting the dots. Oh, my points. I still see them. Sorry guys, I'm not the best at connecting my dots. Alright, so remember, if you get a straight line, your ratio work was done correctly. So you did your ratios correctly. So I hope you guys are thinking, oh yeah, this is actually pretty easy. It's not that bad. So I want you to try to do number 2 on your own and then come back to the video and then see if you've done them correctly, okay? So go step by step, set up the ratio you're given. So hopefully you can see which ratio you have, and then you can come back and check yourself. But for me, I'm just gonna go ahead and push on through it. So I'm gonna start with the first one. Now I'm gonna set up my formula. I'm gonna put my given ratio on the left and then the ratio that I'm looking for on the right. So you guys can see that I'm given 2/16. 2 represents the time and 16 represents the distance, okay? So before we continue, let me go ahead and read the question. It says, Brittany is riding her bike at a constant rate of speed. The table shows the distance she travels in various amounts of time. Fill in the missing values. Graph the values on the coordinate plane and then determine how far Brittany travels in 1.5 hours by looking at the graph. Now, we're not even going to solve for it. We're going to look at the graph to see how far she travels, and then we'll check ourselves, okay? So let's look. First up, we need to fill in these values. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Where were we? So again, my ratio that I'm given, I want to put that on the left side, and I'm going to say that hours and then miles. So hours will go as my numerator and miles will be my denominator. So I'm going to put 2 on the top because that's my numerator, and I'm going to put 16 as my denominator. Okay, so granted, I know some of you are like, oh, I already see one pattern that we can solve for, and that's 32. If you see that, wonderful. You can go ahead and start with that ratio, but I'm just going to go in order because it's just easier for me. So I'm going to do 20. Now remember, 20 represents my miles, and remember we said order matters, so that needs to represent my what? Denominator. I hope you said that, because if you did, you are awesome. You got it right. So what am I solving for in this ratio? My time. Good. So I want to know how long it takes Brittany to travel 20 miles. Okay. So granted, you can't see this. Some of you can't see what I should multiply 16 by to get 20. So you can plug in your calculator to see how many times 16 can go into 20. So 20 divided by 16 will give me 1.25. So if I multiply 16 by 1.25, and I'm just going to check that this is correct. 16 times 1.25, does that give me 20? Yep, it sure does. So if I multiply 16 by 1.25, I should get 20. So whatever I do on the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. So 2 times 1.25 gives me, plug that into your calculator if you don't know how to do that in your head, is 2.5, okay? So that becomes my numerator. So it takes her 2.5 hours to travel 20 miles on her bike, okay? Now let's go ahead and do the next one. 3 is my next one. So I'm gonna, again,